And we're back with part 2 of the patch, or patch 1.2.1, because we're super clever like that. And yeah, it is because we have a community feedback update that was just released. And that's pretty awesome. Rob already started cutting down and working on the production so you guys can see what's going on in the screen. Thank you very much for that, Rob. So with us now, we have replacing QXC and TLO, Puck and Intense. So why don't you introduce yourselves really quickly? Puck?
Yep.
I think most people have an idea of who I am, but I'm a Protoss player for Flipside Tactics, and yeah.
Most people probably don't know who I am, but I'm a Terran player for Sidestorm Gaming.
Cool. So moving on then. Intense is our fellow American now, and so he will read this macro mechanics changes for us, and we'll get to talk about it afterwards as it is quite lengthy. So why don't you start with macro mechanics, Intense?
Okay. So as you know, we've been focusing our discussions on trying to decide what the best move is for the macro mechanics. After many hours of playtesting and discussions, we decided to try out the changes mentioned last week. First of all, we would like to point out that we saw the poll and posts relating to macro mechanics this week, and we'd like to thank you for the discussions. We don't agree with the idea that macro mechanics should be completely removed. When we tried this, and many of you pointed this out, each of the three races lost a bit of their identity and uniqueness. Secondly, we'd like to also clear up a misconception in this area. The goal of testing these changes wasn't necessarily about making StarCraft 2 easy to play or easy to master. The goal was to see if we can free up clicks on less interesting parts of the game so that we can see those clicks being utilized in more exciting to see more parts of the game. We clearly believe StarCraft 2 is one of the most challenging games to master in the world, and this pursuit of mastery is a critical component of the game. Instead, we're adding new modes such as co-op missions and Archon mode to make the game more approachable. Now let's talk about more of the details we found this week.
Okay, so that's an intro to macro mechanics. I guess we can jump into specifics now, right? Or does anyone have anything to say about this? Or just jump into the discussion? Go to Terran?
I think it's cool that they're re-adding things like that. I think that it adds a lot of strategic depth to the different races. And like they said, it makes them more different because they felt really similar, especially Terran and Protoss, without the mule and without the chrono boost. At least for me it did. You just build units and workers constantly.
I like the reasoning too, and I think we both, or most of us, already gave our opinion on this. But Puck, if there's anything you would like to add,
I'm honestly fine with it either way. I don't necessarily enjoy having the corner boost everything, but that maybe just because I'm Protoss. But overall, I don't feel like it necessarily diminishes the skill required to play the game either way, whether with or all.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception. I'm glad that they're making a point of it. The goal was always to make the game more interesting, and if it appeals to casuals as a result, then that's great. But yeah, again, just to reiterate, my dream scenario for the whole economics of StarCraft 2 would be to implement the Team Liquid economy and get rid of macro mechanics. But I don't mind macro mechanics either, and in its current state, I think it is necessary to have them because otherwise it slows down the game a little too much. So let's just jump into Terran. Let's see if there's anything new here. We're going through the patch notes or the balance feedback update with you guys. Basically, we're not sure what we're reading. We haven't read it, so this is an improv episode, so to say, or an improv bonus to the episode. It says Terran. The Terran Mule isn't difficult to execute, even when we compare it to the automated one versus the Heart of the Swarm, one side by side. Okay. Therefore, we believe this week's balance update is the way to go for Terran. So, MorroW, did you agree with this?
No, not necessarily. Like the reason I was such a big fan of the Legacy of the Void Mule was not necessarily because it was automated and like removing clicks. I was just looking at it from a design perspective and all that what that did. But I already talked about that, and he also mentions like it's muling with Terran. It was never like hard if you compare it up to like Inject, which is a lot harder. So yeah, just I don't agree with it.
Okay, Puck.
I never really felt like Terran mules were hard to utilize at all either. And I felt like with the macro mechanics, it was the only race that could actually be punished for not utilizing would be Protoss, simply because like Protoss isn't necessarily automatic because you do have to switch it. So it just didn't really make sense to me that Zerg and Terran got everything automatic while Protoss still has to make adjustments.
Okay. Actually, or Intense, let's finish up thoughts.
I don't think it's much more difficult, or at least skill-wise, I think it's pretty similar, the automated ones compared to the other ones, because of how you bank up energy and can drop them whenever. In terms of design, I kind of like the energy-based mules a little bit better, because you decide between supply drop, scan, and mules, but I wish the mules were a little bit less effective, or they changed the energy values around or something to compensate for that, so we'd see more of each one rather than just mules.
Okay. Theo?
Yeah, the thing I would like to point out is I'm not sure this is the reasoning I would like to see for going with the Heart of the Swarm mule, that it's only about difficulty and the execution of the mule. I think the things MorroW talked about, right before with the QXC and Tilo, and then the week before that, was more interesting because there's definitely possible problems with such an expensive mule over scan that might not necessarily give you the information so that you could beat certain protozoans, right? But of course, this issue was most present in Heart of the Swarm. So my full opinion on whether it should be one or the other depends on how bad certain all-ins are going to be, or the information that you need from scan, and thus you lose a lot of mule income, right? But with that being said, I just don't see why the old mule wasn't better. Like if there's nothing difficult about it with either or mule, why not just leave it at the automated one, which gives some of the benefits MorroW talked about, and of course also most importantly prevents this insane mule at the offensive base, or your last taken expansion with global range of mule, which I think is one of the top problems with the mule design. So why not just keep it at the automated mule to fix these issues and leave it at that? That's just
Yeah, I think I agree with MorroW's sentiment as well, and Theo's in this case. I think that the automated mule was probably a little bit better, just because it gave you options. Scan costed 100 energy, which meant you still had to decide, and it was a tactical decision when to scan and where to scan. So it wasn't like you were getting a little too much out of your energy or anything like that. Supply drops maybe are kind of whatever, but so what if there was a middle ground where maybe because I think the Blizzard is doing this because it's basically saying, okay, I guess if one race is going to look back at their base, then every race should, kind of thing, right? So what if the mule was basically based on cooldown rather than energy, and keep the energy for scans and maybe supply drops or something else, But I mean, just to keep it simple.
Without it being autocast, you're suggesting?
Right.
The issue with that, CatZ, is that so you wanna keep the range to like you have a range of 30. You basically have Legacy Void, but you turn off the autocast. That's what you're suggesting, right? The issue with that is just that it becomes too difficult. So muling suddenly becomes very similar to how injecting was in Heart of the Swarm. Like every second you miss of inject, it's a second you miss of, like you don't get it back, and that would be the new mule. And on top of that, you would have to drop at every single base because of the range. So it would actually operate precisely like inject, and that's just a little bit too difficult.
Because it's precisely like inject. I don't get it.
So you have a cooldown. So with inject you have like this 40-second cycle. So every 40 seconds you inject, and with the mule you have the cycle.
But you wouldn't. No, it wouldn't mean that you miss. I mean, they could do the same that they're doing for larva injects, where you can stack them, right? So I guess
you could build up charges.
Yeah, it would just be. You would build up charges, and it would be time based, rather than energy based.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing change. Because again, I don't care if it's automated or not, because I don't find it difficult to drop mules. I just would find it extremely punishing if I had to drop mules every single minute and be precise about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it would be exactly what I mean. They found a perfect solution with the injects. I think we all agreed on that. We all gave the new inject a 10. I think that it found a middle ground between casuals and pros, and there's still a benefit in doing it faster and more consistently. And I think they could just take away from that and take the exact same direction with the muling. And I think the proper way to do that would be, to make it a time-based ability rather than an energy-based ability that stacks as well with time. So I really don't see a reason not to do it, other than maybe it's too similar to the Zerg mechanic. But I mean, if it's proven and if it works and it still feels Terran-y, then I think that would be the best. And then Terran would still have free energy to use scans and whatnot. You would still be forced into making an orbital command to gain access to the mules, and that's cool. And I don't know, the scan just feels more tactical and a little bit more fun. So when we rate the proposed change that I just gave, rather than circling around the actual feedback so much. So for my change, MorroW, what would you rate it?
I'm gonna give it a 10. I think that's an amazing idea, and I haven't thought of it myself. But yeah, that would be a great way to remove out to CatZ Mule and still keep all the great design parts about the Legacy of the Void Mule.
Cool. Andrew?
I agree. I think that creates a cool balance as well as being able to build up the charges. I'd say my biggest thing with the auto cast mule was it would automatically cast down on the closest mineral line, and I'd like to cast them on my natural, for example. But if they build up charges like that, you wouldn't have to worry about mining out your first base so fast, and then having to move your orbital over to next other mineral patches and whatnot. But with the charge buildup, I think that would solve a lot of that issue. And even with 30 range, it would still be enough, I think, to drop at your natural.
Yeah, and you could even once you're mined out while you're flying, you're probably gaining charges, and then you drop on another base or closer to another base and you'll that.
Yeah, that would help a lot too.
Puck?
I like it for the most part, but I don't think it. Bringing up what Theo said earlier about how Terran can be extremely strong in the situation of, say, a base race, where it's becomes one base versus floating command centers, and then one that's sitting there. If Terran can just mass mule all of a sudden, then it's already game over for the Protoss. But other than that, that's something that's not necessarily very easy to fix in the first place.
I mean, that's something that it is in the game regardless. So think about that. The proposed change is to improve the current state of the mule rather than to find a.
I don't necessarily believe that was a concern by most people in the first place to begin with, because that situation rarely arises to begin with. So I'm all for that suggestion as well.
Cool. Andrew, did you rate it?
No, but I'd say I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I'd say the biggest thing with that is that mills would just still be their separate thing. And I think it creates cool strategic diversity, having the different energy between all the different things themselves. But aside from that, I think it'd be a really cool change. And what Puck was saying, the base trades and the mass mills would still be really strong.
Okay. Puck, do you want to rate it?
I guess I'd give it an 8.
Okay.
I'll give you an 8, CatZ.
Thank you, Puck. Theo?
I'll give it a 9.
Okay, do you have anything to add on the subject?
As long as it doesn't become too complicated with having to go to 3 different bases to execute mule because of the mule range. I'm not exactly sure how I picture 30 range, but it seems if for the most part you can hit 3 bases or something with it. But if as long as that doesn't complicate things by having to do that manually every single time, go to 3 bases similar to inject, I'm not sure. But of course, with the queuing system, that might fix a lot of that, similar to inject. So, yeah, 9.
Okay, cool. So that's our proposed change. I think most people like it. And we'll move on to Protoss. Puck, why don't you read this one?
For Chrono Boost, we are realizing that the new version isn't always better than the old version. We are currently worried that this change is a bit of a side grade than an upgrade overall, due to it being better in some situations and worse than others. However, we would still like to pursue trying out this new version so that we can learn more about it. The main concern on this side is, yes, it's true that the new one is cool and different, but is it actually what's best for the game? If it is, we will make the switch, and if not, we can always revert it back to what we have in HOTS.
Okay. Morrow, why don't you start us off with this?
Well, I talked about the mule just before this segment, or the chrono boost. I think, like I said, the word chrono boost is amazing the way it works, and I hope they don't change it.
Cool. Theo?
I completely agree. I don't understand what it means that it's a side grade. It gives a boost no matter what. How is it worse in any situation? Like I can't really fathom that. Like the only negative that I can picture is this thing between switching, and Curiously mentioned it. It's mostly fixed now if you just do it within a 4-second time frame and you click all the buildings you want to chrono boost. I would argue that's still much less clicks than in the Heart of the Swamp version, so I wouldn't mind having to click everything I want to click. You know, it's not that big of a deal, right? That's the only negative thing I can picture, and I can't think of any other situation where I would say with the old chrono boost you could risk clicking 2 times, for example, right? Like that's also a side grade or whatever it is that the meaning with it. So I don't understand, and I agree with MorroW. I hope they don't go back to the old one as well.
Cool. Puck?
I think the only downside to the current one is, like, say if you get to the late game and you have a bunch of chrono boosts saved up, it's really hard to sync your warp gate timings in when you need to warp things in, simply because you can only do it to a limited amount of gateways, whereas before you could do, like, say, all 8 to 12 gateways at once. But, like, overall, I'm all for the new change as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a good point, but I think the warp gate situation is already being buffed if you add in the fact that you have the 2-second warp in and the warp prism, and of course the new core units that potentially receives buffs. But of course that is a good point, and that is a negative to add into it. But I don't think it's necessary to be able to chrono boost all of your warp gates with a lot of clicks and stuff in the late game. But it was a decent feature. It was actually pretty good.
Intense.
But yeah.
I think by side grade, they mean that you can't like bank up your chrono boost to get something faster with the 50% speed boost compared to just the 22.5% with the new one. Like, for example, with like warp gate rushes or things like that, you could bank up your chrono boost and not use it on your workers and then have a faster warp gate. So in terms of that, it is slightly weaker. Overall, design-wise, I think it's a lot better. We're seeing players like consistently use it throughout the game. You don't have to keep looking back at your upgrades and just click it again. I feel like it's just a waste of time, a waste of actions. And like, it's going to more useful things now, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. That's true. And that's good because we don't want those blingo lens. I just hate seeing 75% energy in the Nexus and you bang it all into the warp gate or the like blingo lens. I don't see in any situation how a banked up energy on a Nexus is not for anything other than a super all-in thing that, because you don't know precisely what it's being used for, the opponent has a hard time scouting, whereas with a consistent chrono boost, it's better to react to. Yeah. That's just what I think about it.
My favorite thing about it is that it is a lot more user-friendly, so
yeah,
like
exactly.
If we're thinking about it of approaching the new players, like they won't be so agitated that they always have to chrono boost things all the time. So
yeah, so I think we mostly only have positive things to say about the current chrono boost, and we basically as a whole hope that they keep it. So stop considering changing it, I guess, to Blizzard is what we would say. In previous discussions, I think MorroW brought up how Protoss has always felt like the gimmicky race, and that sort of thing that you guys were mentioning, Theo, and Intense, where you can bank up Chrono Boost and spend it on an upgrade an upgrade to make a timing extremely fast and things like that. That kind of thing being reduced and kind of put aside in the game, I think is great for the race design and the game design in general. So
sure.
I too like the Chrono Boost the way it is right now, and we hope they keep it. There's nothing to rate because they're just saying they may or may not keep it. But moving on from that, yeah, we all agree. Just keep it at what it is right now. Going to Zerg now. We're now leaning towards the fact that auto-injecting might not be the direction that we wanted to go in the long term. Okay. The primary reason is we've seen and will continue to see perception issues that diminish great Zerg players with arguments such as Zerg has no macro to do, or every Zerg no matter the skill level can macro well because it's all just automatic. What it boils down to is that we think that What it boils down to is we think the gain of having auto inject does not outweigh this negative perception that the change creates. Okay. For example, offensive warpins was not something that was unbeatable, and it wasn't a strategy that allows low-skilled players to beat pro players on a consistent basis. In Protoss matchups, we saw better players winning games. However, it has been seen by players and our community as a strategy that just makes Protoss play gimmicky and less skillful. So, just like auto-inject, this was something that we decided to change because the cool factor of having an easy access to offensive warpins without having tech to something didn't outweigh the negative perception that it was creating. Damn. Therefore, we'll be trying out the queuing up version in the next balance update, so focus on play testing this change and let us know your thoughts and feedback. Okay, so they rambled a lot, but basically we all already agreed that we like the new larva inject. I think it solves every issue really well, and so they should keep it the way it is. So do keep testing it and keep it, I guess. It's 10 from me in that regard, and MorroW and Theo have already had their
10.
share. So
Yeah.
Puck, is there anything you would like to add on this?
I haven't actually read too much of it. So essentially, it's larva is auto-casted, and you can use multiple queens to inject on a single hatchery. Is that the case?
Right, you can.
But they will queue up, so you gain nothing from having one hatchery and three queens.
I really like the change then. If that's the case.
Intense.
I really like the change as well. I'm not very good at Zerg. I was playing it on Legacy of the Void earlier today, trying it out. And I thought it was really cool how I could bring all my queens to the front, build extra queens, queue up some injects, and then bring them all to the front to defend different adept pressures and things like that without being punished for it. And it creates a lot of other strategy opportunities and whatnot by being able to do that. So I enjoyed it.
Okay, great. So I think we can close that topic pretty fast. Yeah, we all agree that the current inject is perfect and it solves most issues, or maybe not perfect, but pretty close to. Advanced ping options will be the next topic, and Intense has proven to be our most reliable reader in the team here. So
in class.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's all right, boy.
Oh, okay. With the addition of Archon mode and co-op missions, we have been looking at ways to improve communication in team games. We heard from several people at the Community Summit that they would like to see something similar to the advanced ping options available in Heroes of the Storm. We like this idea, and so we've been working on a version that makes sense for StarCraft 2. Right now, what we've been thinking is when you hold down the ping command, you see a panel of options for specific commands: attack, defend, on my way, and retreat. This sends a message to all of your allies and creates a beacon in the world that they can see. Also, when issuing regular pings, not through this panel, on units, structures, or resources, a specific message and beacon are created to help provide more context for your teammates as to what you're calling out. While playtesting an early version of this internally, we received feedback that the ping hotkey is cumbersome. We're considering changing the quick ping hotkey to Alt plus left mouse button. To make room for this, we would move the default hotkey for toggle health bars to the apostrophe key. We're looking at this because we feel that using pings is a more frequent action for the average user. Of course, these hotkeys can be customized for those who prefer different setups.
Cool. So, yeah, that note was completely unrelated to anything. I think that's great. I mean, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. They're adding a feature that, obviously adds to the team game and the experience. You don't have to use it, and so there's no downside to it from my perspective. It's just, from what I understand, that chat will, they would have in Dota 2 or, I guess, Heroes of the Storm.
Something I'd like to add is it'd be really cool if they made it so you can actually draw on the minimap.
Yeah.
You can in Dota.
Yeah, that would be really cool, especially for spectator modes and you could detail so much more strategy when you're casting a game and whatnot in game. That would be great, actually. Yeah, maybe we should talk about that a little bit more, but Yeah, I think this is a straightforward good thing. I don't see any negative about it. Can anyone spot any negative, any downside to it?
I mean, I think Avillo uses that hotkey, so he'll have to change that. But
Or not talk to
Can't you just change the
yeah, you
hotkey
can just
still?
change it.
Yeah, that's what they
That's
said.
not really a downside. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. I played a 2v2 tournament this morning with Tesro, and communicating was really hard to like
I mean,
show
you
what I
were playing
wanted
with
to do.
Destro, so of course.
Well, just in terms of having this, would have made it a lot easier to execute strategies and communicate what we want to do with army movement. And same with Archon mode. I think it's a really good change. Like, this is amazing. This is going to make the game a lot more appealing
It's
to
almost
casual
as if you
players.
guys don't
But
play
even for
speak
arcade, right?
English.
What happened?
But even for arcade, this is good, I think. Like, I can imagine a lot of maps and custom games or whatever where this is useful in a sense.
Yeah, and anything where there's co-op in StarCraft, I think this is going to be a huge deal.
Indeed. So, does anyone have anything negative to say about this?
I mean, if I'm like, let's say I'm like spectating a game with my little daughter, and like some immature guy just like draws a penis on the minimap. How can I explain that?
Okay,
They should definitely add an
that's
option
not
to
even the
disable
topic
it.
at hand. But yeah, like I think we've come to that. This is great. Good job, Blizzard. Keep thinking of things like this. And another thing to add would be drawing on the minimap. Somehow we have to ban penises. Though, is the
You could block
But,
communication.
like, the
I'm
thing
sure.
is like, the game is rated for a certain age group, so if the dad's allowing the
so
little
that's
daughter...
parent, Morrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point actually. Checkmate. So I guess let's move on to the next topic. That was pretty straightforward. And this is the last topic actually. So I think that Theo should read it.
Right. So am I gonna wait for it to pop up on stream here, or should I go find it myself? That's the dilemma.
There it is.
Alright. Balance in the beta. This week, we also wanted to discuss the last phase of the beta. The decision on what to do with the macro mechanics would be one of the last design changes to the game, so we'll be focusing on balance tuning. One thing to remember though is the highest level players are still playing Heart of the Swarm, and this level is where balance problems are the most apparent. We've seen this exact thing back in the Heart of the Swarm beta. Because the top end players focus on current tournaments, it's difficult to gather data at that skill level. And even if they do play for a week or two, it's just not enough time for them to figure out what's optimal in the new game. For example, Hellbat drops. A simple and easy to execute strategy wasn't seen as being overpowered during the beta, but we had to react with the patch after the game went live.
That's kind of bullshit, by the way, but go on.
Okay. Therefore, while we will do our best to balance the game as best as we can before the launch, we expect there might be some issues that will need to be solved right after the release, especially when tournaments begin next year. We will definitely be putting extra emphasis on the game balance right after the game launches in order to react quickly to any problems that arise. The goal in the beta is to balance the game as best as we can for all skill levels, right below the pro level, and then focus on the pro level balance heavily in the first weeks and months after the game releases. The timing of the game's release lines up well with this plan because there will be a few months break in WCS and other major tournaments out there right after the game releases.
Cool. So, yeah, the part that I said was kind of bullshit was the Hellbat drops. They were pretty OP in the beta, man.
Yeah, I agree.
They were like visibly overpowered, but I mean, there is something to be said about what Blizzard's saying. I don't know if you know it is because the top end players aren't playing the game yet as much. I think that we have a pretty competitive ladder in Legacy of the Void right now, and I think that we can figure out things like this without necessarily playing at a GSL level, because the same principles apply. But I do like the sentiment of the message, which is what we've been echoing throughout the life of this show, which is we need to focus on design right now and not so much on balance. The game needs to be and feel fun, and sometimes balance gets in the way of design. For example, certain units, if they're not balanced, it's going to kind of ruin the experience for everyone else design-wise. The Adept is a good example of that. I personally love the design of the unit, but I think it's pretty broken in its current state, and there needs to be a lot of tweaking, not just with that unit, but with units around it, because if you just nerf the Adept, then Protoss is going to go to shit, because it's such a core unit right now. It's more than a core unit, right? It's a necessary unit right now for Protoss. So when you compare it to other Protoss quote-unquote core units, you could live without Zealots and without Stalkers right now. You cannot live without Adepts. So we need to find a better middle ground and maybe buffing things around the Adept rather than just nerfing these core units in order to make the game the most interesting that it can be. So does anyone have anything to add or anything to say about this? Maybe MorroW?
Yeah. Well, I have something to add.
Oh, perfect.
It sounds like with 2 months until release that they are transitioning over to numerical adjustments.
Yeah.
Probably only. I hate this idea. I don't like. It sounds like they're going back to the old Blizzard that we have been criticizing for doing radical changes. And now, of course, I think I remember Total Biscuit tweeting that, oh, all of these cool new things with new macro mechanics, we're kind of going back now to Heart of the Swarm, right? All of these things that we might have hoped for, disruptor changes, perhaps economy changes, or a new design for the Adept and stuff. Of course, there might come some armored Adept sometimes in the nearest future, and then that's locked, and we will only do numerical adjustments. I think even after release, it's reasonable to have small radical changes, not like we revamp all single units, but like with the Swarmers, we take one unit at a time and test it, or even make a beta section for it in case the public test maps are not enough, right? Like I don't see why there shouldn't be room to test these new things and new designs and stuff when problems could arise, right? Because I'm not sure I could be happy with PvP releasing the Disruptor the way it is right now, for example. I think that's going to cause trouble. I'm not sure I would like to hear what Pop thinks about the Disruptor, but with the weaker Colossus and the extreme power of Disruptors being that all Protoss units, they have high HPs, and the single damage burst from Disruptor as opposed to Storm is so high that it damages basically any unit and kills most of them. I think that causes problems with engagements in PvP, and I would very, very much like them to see still being open to do changes rather than just balance adjustments. That's something I wanted to say.
Yeah, I agree. Disruptor in PvP is kind of meh. Like, it just makes engagements extremely awkward, and if it's like, if you're moving out and there's like 2 disruptors and they go in on you, you're kind of just dead. It just doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. Just to touch on that and add to what you were saying, Theo, I actually made a post on Reddit, not an actual post on Reddit, but a reply on Reddit where I touched on the same things just yesterday. I feel like because of the very tight deadline that we have with Blizzard right now and the release of the game, they are very likely to stop trying to do major changes. And I, too, am completely against that. It's really hard to pinpoint where the problem is, but I feel like the game is still incomplete in some ways. It just feels that way. It feels like there are gaps that need to be closed for the game to be as fun as it can be. That is not to say that it's not more fun than Heart of the Swarm. In my opinion, the game is already much better than Heart of the Swarm ever was, and that Blizzard is or has been going in the right direction. But I am too very concerned and scared that with the tight deadline that we have, they'll stop taking risks and kind of just look to tweak numbers and go into balance now. Because, I mean, that's the whole point of this show, right? Like, the whole point of this show and the premise of the show was to talk about design and how we're moving towards an end goal with Blizzard, rather than to talk about balance, because I personally believe that that's almost irrelevant in a beta stage, except for when balance gets in the way of fun, So, yeah, I completely agree with you, Theo, and I really hope that Blizzard is still willing to do big changes and try out big things rather than just tweak numbers, because, again, the game doesn't feel complete to me yet. MorroW, do you have an opinion on the whole subject?
Yeah, I think it's like it was like really sad when I saw the post, because we were all like fucking hyped about, you know, Blizzard changing. There's gonna do things that are gonna be really good for the game, like years to come. And then they implement it. Everybody is hyped as fuck, except for automatic inject. And it just seems like the issue of Blizzard and the community, and just in general, most people just seem to draw macro mechanics under the same line instead of looking at them individually.
Yeah.
And then we get all these like weird opinions, like people hate. We hate the macro mechanics because Zerg has automatic inject, but they don't mention that. They just say, "Oh, I fucking hate the new macro mechanics," and it's like, and now it just feels like Mule got like I saw like nobody was complaining about the new Mule, right? Like sure we had some problems scanning in late game or what have you, but I think these issues could have been addressed tweaking numbers, and it just feels
Absolutely.
like we got screwed over because they just looked at inject and said, "Oh well, inject." So we go back to hardware swarm, and then they just kind of look at Mule, and they just kind of do the same with that, and it just feels like most of the community also just they don't look at the things individually, and that's
Yeah.
where it's really painful for me because like I have said everything I can about the Mule, and it just feels like a lost battle at this point without even like having my counter arguments towards me. It just seems like it kind of just happened that they went back to the
Yeah.
hardware swarm Mule without even explaining why that is.
Yeah, opinions seem very polarizing in general, especially because once you read an opinion or see an opinion as a community member that you like, maybe you just stand behind it without necessarily understanding it. So I think that, you know, shows like this where we address everything individually and kind of talk about it is where Blizzard should be looking to get their feedback and viewers to get educated on, you know, what we feel is right and the reasons for each, you know, for each argument that we make, so that so that people can more or less understand where we're coming from. I mean, we know the game just as well as anyone in or out of Blizzard. So I agree with you, MorroW, and yeah, I really hope that they're still willing to test things and change things around and finish this game, because it's I think I'm pretty hopeful for it overall. So, but it does look like the show in itself as the patches. I mean, this episode compared to the last one, there's a lot less discussions to be had, right? There's a lot more numbers being tweaked and a lot more balance being addressed rather than design, and that made me a little bit sad as well. So, yeah, I guess any closing thoughts on this before we go to questions? Nobody?
Well,
I actually have a small suggestion that's kind of out of the blue, and it's related to the warp prism that Mar and I we talked about, and warping in general actually. And I kind of wanted to see if we could do a raid on them. So it's quite simple. We have 2 seconds on the improved warping and 16 seconds of the normal/naked pylon warping. There's a lot of consensus amongst pro players that the warp prism is simply per cost the strongest unit in Legacy of the Void. Like,
It's
you have
pretty
a
good.
crazy, it's pretty good. So what we kind of thought about, Maura and I, is that we could reduce the naked warping from 16 to 12 or 10 seconds, but we kind of agreed on 12 seconds for starters, and then remove the warp prism improved warping upgrade, because it's still going to be used, and I'm pretty sure that you're still going to go in and do warpings, and when you see units, you simply click the one button cancel, and you get all of your money back and go away, right?
Right.
I think the fact with warp prism that you can just go in and warp in, even when there's defense. Like, if you have charge and adepts and spine crawlers, they don't really do damage to adepts and stuff, and you have to keep so many units at home for a circus, for example. It just seems wrong to me. I kind of like that you can push away, but at the same time, Protoss can do this threatening thing with the warp prism and force statics and units at home and press to cancel if you can't get the warp in time. At the same time, as we've seen in our beloved cinematic, the pylon is interesting, but it kind of feels babysitted when there has to be a gateway added before you can do your warping. I have not used or seen any Protoss player like legitimately do naked warpings on a 16-second warping pylon that has 200% damage taken while you do it, even for just the most gentle harass. I've not seen it. Like, not without adding a gateway. Like, I wouldn't do it without adding a gateway first, simply. And I think it would be nice to reduce the naked pylon warping by 4 to 6 seconds, so that it can be more a
Just to
greater
compensate.
incentive to do, to compensate and make a greater incentive to actually use the naked pylons for harass and other things, right?
Yeah.
While at the same time nerfing the warp prism a little bit. That's kind of what I opt for a change. Then I would like to hear your opinion on that.
What I think would be a very cool idea is, instead of having it to be buffed by like Nexus or gateways, if the pylon actually had an individual upgrade, which would maybe slightly buff the HP, but would also decrease the warp in time. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be like 2 seconds. It could be like 4 or 5 or whatever seconds. And that way you could actually still utilize pylons out on the map.
I don't know if I like that. I think that's a little too complicated. And more than that, I don't know. Like it opens up more possibilities at lesser risk for Protoss. It is kind of similar to what the Overlord upgrade is, though. So in that regard, maybe it's not the worst idea. But I'm not sure how much I like that.
I think there's a lot of design possibilities, but I think with what we currently have in a design perspective, reducing the naked pylon warp in timer and perhaps removing it from the warp prism completely, MorroW did propose that you could, for example, make a single exception for the warp prism so that it's 4 seconds instead of 2 or 6 seconds. But that might be complicated, and we're kind of sure that Blizzard doesn't like single exceptions like that with a warp in, right?
Yeah, I
So,
wouldn't mind 10 for each. Even 10 seems perfectly reasonable. It's not like
yeah, that's me too.
yeah, like it's not like the warp prism can't fly in and force field out a ramp. You can still have the sentries, for example, pre-made, rather than warping them in with the warp prism right away.
Exactly. That's very nice that you mentioned that. I've actually lost games to that simply because they're not even investing in sentries early on. They just go in and warp them in, without risk, without investing them preemptively.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a very good point. That's actually something that has annoyed me. And now that we have PvP as a topic with this, one might argue, oh, now you can't do your warp prism harass versus Protoss anymore because the one guy has 2 seconds and the other guy has 10. I think that's absolutely incorrect. You go in with a warp prism and you start a 10-second solid warp in. The other guy is going to respond to that with his extremely fast warp in, and you cancel yours, warp everything in at your main army, and suddenly this guy is stuck with 20 supply in his main while you do an engagement on the main army, for example, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to see this work without having the units to actually warp in, because I think it's a cool mechanic that Protoss can cancel his warp in and go away as if nothing happened, and at the same time not see this, I'm sorry, ridiculously overpowered warp in that the warp prism has for 200 minerals that can warp in infinite amounts of already Protoss units that does way too much to workers, and
especially in the stage at which you can get a warp prism, right? Because we've established the adept is too powerful in the early game, for example, and that's where you would go with a warp prism, make adepts off of a warp prism, warp them in instantly. If your opponent doesn't have enough or in place, you just win the game, and that's just too sudden and feels too frustrating. I think for the other two races, it's like, oh fuck, I didn't see a warp prism coming. I guess I'm dead.
Yeah.
So yeah, and like you said, and like I initially brought up, if you're not investing into units pre-warp prism like the sentries, then that kind of feels just cheap. You can just see, oh, his army is not at the main. I'll warp in a sentry. We'll warp in an instant, and then you can force fill the ramp and win the game. Just things like that suddenly make games end, and that you have to account for so hard that are just terrible for the game, I think. So to your idea, I'll give it a 10. And the number of seconds, I think, is debatable. Again, that's a balance tweak, I guess, but I wouldn't mind it starting at 10.
Agree.
MorroW, it's also your idea. So.
Well, I actually think like warp prism. I would love a singular rule for it to have like 4 seconds instead of 2, and then like Theo said, naked.
Do you think
pylons.
4 seconds actually is enough?
Yeah, I think 4 seconds is enough because there's a lot of situations like you can fly like on top of a turret, and change the mode, and then warp in units like before it dies. I'm pretty sure you can do that just because it's 2 seconds. Like there's so many situations where you have like a couple of marines or a turret or whatever like shooting at the warp prism, but they just like they fucking warp it in instantly, and that's like it's like so bluntly overpowered to me. The 2 second warp in from warp prisms. So I think that's something that kind of needs a hot fix. And then, with the 16-second on warping on naked pylons, I think yes, that's a little bit too much of a risk. So I would say I'd like to see that tap down a bit.
To like 10 seconds, 12 seconds, somewhere along those lines.
It's irrelevant. I like it lower. Yes.
Okay.
It's worth testing.
So to rate Theo's and your idea, I guess. I guess the idea in itself would be that the warp prism should warp in slower, right?
Yes.
And pylons should warp in faster, naked pylons.
Yes,
So,
that's the idea.
Yeah. I guess the numbers can be tweaked and fixed. So what would you rate the general concept or direction, MorroW?
10.
Okay. Intense?
I would give his idea like a 9. The one thing that I don't like about it is how if the warp prism has its own specific warp in time for units compared to the naked pylons and then the gateway or whatever pylons, it just seems too complicated for me. I think it'd be better if it was like an upgrade. You started off with the naked warp in time on warp prisms, and then if you got like a 100 upgrade on the Robo Bay or something, then you'd have like the powered pylon upgrade or like warp in times, and that would be a lot cooler. And then it wouldn't be abused in the early game with all the different adept all-ins and things like that. It would come a bit later in the game and solve a lot of the balance issues that go along with that as well.
I actually really like it. I'm just not sure if anyone would ever get the upgrade. Because you can't, it's so hard to predict how much damage you can do with the warp prism later on. Right? It's like, what bothers me about it right now is how you can just be like, oh, he doesn't have something here, I'll just warp in a fuckload of shit. Right? At very little risk. But
with an upgrade or not, I think the idea is almost as good.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of complications with the adept currently, and I honestly just think nerfing the warp prism like this is the best way to solve most of the problems with adepts, honestly.
a lot of at least, yeah.
Yeah, and well, my original idea is, that it's just naked, because I think the warp prism with 6 pickup range, you can load units, and the warp prism is not gonna die to Hydralisk, it's not gonna die to Marines, you kill 4 or 5 SUVs and you go away, right? And it's a 200 million investment compared to, if you compare that to the damage that it's needed with the Doom drop, arguing, of course, Terran has advantages with their drops and stuff. I just think it's quite mathematically obvious that a 200 minimal unit as opposed to 4 medivacs, that's 400 and 400, with much, much greater risk of dying, arguably. But that depends a little bit, I just think it's reasonable for test off in the beginning without any upgrades for the warp prism that it just has a flat out warp in at 10 seconds. I don't see how that's not going to be worthwhile. I still don't see why you wouldn't make that versus Zerg, versus Protoss, versus Terran, and just, when you get your +3 charge slots, if they don't respond to it,
Yeah, the one thing that when MorroW brought it up, I kind of thought about it a little bit more. Maybe 10 seconds is a little bit too much time to react. I know that you said you can just unfold the warp prism and get refunded, but it seems like if that is what happens most of the time, it's kind of lame. So I think a little bit lower than 10 seconds would be fine to start the testing with, maybe like 5 or 6. But either way, I think the general direction is like we all know where we're going. Puck, what would you rate?
I definitely agree that 10 seconds would still be too much, because at the current state, it's almost mandatory to go Warp Prism to play any offensive timing or anything like that. If they made it so warp pins were 10 seconds, everyone would just play defensive and just try to get to a max army, I feel. And if you're warping in, it takes 10 seconds. I feel like that'd be way too much time for Terran to react. It's not a huge issue, because you do have 4 units that can go on the warp prism, and it can deny the initial Marines or something that could deny the warp pins. But I still feel 10 seconds would still be a bit too much.
Well,
so what about pylons on the map? Puck, what do you think about that? Reducing that?
I feel like if it was down to 8 or so seconds, I feel like people would still utilize them. But yeah, I don't know. At its current state, pylons are just shitty to warp in at. So much so that it just makes me angry when I accidentally warp in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
Okay, so about the warping thing with Protoss, there was a lot of arguments about defender's advantage and offensive advantages across the races, but not for Protoss because of the old Heart of the Swarm warping mechanic. And especially in the early game, this is, kind of truant with all-in situations and stuff. I think it's reasonable to have this present with the late game as well. The Warp Prism is a 2-supply unit, 200 minerals, and you can do the instant reinforcements even better than in Heart of the Swarm, and, the defender's advantage kind of disappears again, at least in my opinion. Of course, I can't see why you would. For example, Intense, that's a good idea. You can make an upgrade so that the early game stuff, which to me is the most problematic area of the Warp Prism, you could add in the upgrade and then you can keep that and test that further. Because as we see in games now, it seems like the Warp Prism being able to reinforce quickly isn't really an issue in the late game for Protoss. We've been used to Protoss being able to have the Warp in. So I can bow for that and say, okay, it's probably better to make a late game upgrade. But at the same time, Defender's Advantage is a thing that I would like to exist in Protoss matchups, and personally I try to design my strategy so that I can use a Warp Prism mostly when, Zealot starts to kick in versus Terran or Zerg, so I can really reinforce those guys quickly, but otherwise I'm not too bad just with warping in at home and then using a depth teleport or something, and Templars, they don't have energy anyway and stuff, so it's not a huge deal for me that Warp Prisms, they can't warp in as fast. But of course, I know that you love to use, I think at least Blinkstalkers a lot, right, Puck? So with those guys, it definitely makes sense to have a fast warp in, or that would be a significant nerf. So I can agree and see that. Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Puck, what did you rate the change overall?
I give it a 9.
Okay, cool. So yeah, like
I
I like Intense's idea as well of the upgrade. The only problem is I hate upgrades that just don't get used and just sit in the game for no reason. So, and like
it would be used.
It would get used.
It would be insane. I don't like the idea of the upgrade at all.
Just because it's too powerful in your opinion, so it would be a very.
Yeah, I think Warp Prism should never warp in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
It's
even if we say it in late game, it doesn't matter. I don't think it should happen. That's why I don't say a reason for an upgrade. I think my solution is the best.
MorroW's solution is the best. It's been. It is.
It's my opinion.
I think it's like you'd have to have a lot of free sitting supply to really make it really strong to begin with.
Anyway, I think we're going around in circles for the most part, but yeah, we agree that the Warp Prism warps in too fast, and it's one of the stronger units right now. So just nerf it. Make the warp-ins take longer. If you want to compensate, you can make the Naked Islands warp in a little bit faster. It feels way too slow right now. So I think that's the general consensus, and that is just number tweaking, so Blizzard should get on it. Last but not least, we'll take a few questions. If you want to ask us anything, tweet with #thepatch on Twitter, and we'll be going over a few questions. You guys can go on Twitter too and find anything, or maybe a couple of you, maybe Puck and Theo, can you look at the chat and MorroW, all of you just look at the chat and I'll bring up good questions from the chat. So we'll answer all questions that come from Twitter and the better ones from chat, basically. Okay, let's look at this. Question: wasn't the photon overcharge introduced because Protoss had no strong gateway units that they now have they now have with the Adept? #thepatch. I don't think they ever said that was the case, and I don't think that was the case, so I'll just disregard this question unless anyone has anything else to say about it.
I think the only sole reason behind the buff to the photon overcharge on the pylons is simply because Protoss has a hard time taking a third.
Yeah, I like it. I don't think it had too much. Maybe it had to do with lack of good units, but I don't know. I like the photon overcharge where it is. Just needs tweaking numbers. Should Legacy of the Void have Twitch integration like Heroes of the Storm? Sure. I don't think anyone will disagree with that. The patch. What do you expect from allied commanders in the beta? What is the correct term response to carriers? Says C Tokdo on Twitter. I'll throw that question tomorrow.
So it
He's
was
had
about-
experience. Yeah, I know
about carrier. Yeah, I think like if you get to carrier High Templar, Tempest, Colossus, you just like that alone is a win condition. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and say like, sure, Protoss won the game. I don't think there's a way to beat it, and I don't think there was a way to beat it in Heart of the Swarm either. I don't see it as a big problem. You should not let Protoss get to that army. I don't really mind it.
Cool. I personally hate it as Zerg because it's a lot easier to turtle as Protoss against Zerg than it is against Terran, because we usually don't have, millions of medevacs flying around. So we have to deal with the pylons up front. However, with the change to pylons, it might make it so that we can actually punish Protosses for overextending with their aggression, and maybe it becomes a similar situation for Zerg than like what it is for Terran right now, where you just can't let them get to that stage. Otherwise, Zerg should have answers, and I haven't given up on looking for them, but I'm guessing you will need tons of spores, tons of vipers, and maybe a bunch of infestors. The new ability, Parasitic Bomb, is pretty good. Just doesn't really touch carriers for the most part. Does anyone else want to answer that, or just keep moving? No?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about Zerg, but like in terms of game design, I think it's kind of dumb. Like to have one race just completely falter at a certain stage of the game versus certain compositions, kind of like Terran does versus Protoss. Like especially in Legacy of the Void with the better carriers and things like that. Like just having the idea of not letting him get there, like, and just following that like concept, like, I don't really like that personally. I feel like every race should have some chance, and if you have a large enough advantage, you should be able to make some composition that can trade somewhat to win the game.
The most
like
frustrating games ever, and if we ever get to that point again, is when you're ahead and can't finish your opponent off, and your opponent slowly builds to a death ball that you can't kill.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what my take on that is, because I think the turtling concept of Legacy of the Void is completely removed.
Is it?
If we assume, I think it is completely, yeah, because if we assume that the Swarm Host was an overpowered unit, okay, we can at least agree that, I think more so for TVC, we've seen 40G versus Firecake on Binary Research Station. We have this 3-hour game and stuff, like these things could happen, and maybe the same thing could happen with a normal Zerg game, going Swarm Host, sitting on only 3 base economy for the entire game, and suddenly, getting this army that's, let's just assume that it was unbeatable, because I kind of have the same feelings that a lot of Protosses and maybe Terrans had about Swarm Host with the carrier right now. One is, if there's 3 or 6 carriers and then just Adepts, or maybe 2 or 3 Storms, of 2 or 3 Templars, I don't think that's unbeatable in a realistic scenario. I think when MorroW says you have 4 Colossus, 6 Templars with full energy, warp a position with fast warp and pylons, 20 gateways in the bank, and Tempest to kill Liberators off one by one with maximum upgrade for carriers, sure, I can bow down and say Protoss will win. But I think with the options to harass multiple bases because of the increased spread out, I think these units that have extremely strong heads-up fight potential, and even think MorroW can vouch for this, because the Liberator does seem like, versus Protoss Ground, a unit that should win in a heads-up fight. But if Protoss manages to catch the Liberators on siege, so that Terran has a lot more micro to do, or he simply just avoids the Liberators and goes around, initiates harass, either with Zealots or etc., I think it's very possible to argue that it's not quite as simple as you have to kill, in this case, the Protoss before he gets carriers, and even if he gets some, or to an extent, the Terran is able to keep the Protoss economy low so that he cannot replenish carriers, getting interceptors dying, etc. So I think this is a vulnerable subject to discuss. But with that being said, I think the carrier is too strong, especially compared to the Tempests. Mass affair damaged at least. So I think a carrier could deserve a tweak or two. And for the most part, I also agree with the Tens that this design that there's 2 strong late game units without each race having equal opportunities to counter each other with that. I agree with that, but I'm not quite sure that's the stage yet. Because I've had experience with carriers where I just lose all interceptors and have nothing to replenish them with. So and
Yeah.
also games where I don't lose a single unit. So, yeah, it's difficult.
Yep.
Yeah.
So tweaking and balance might be necessary there, but I mean it is one of the most difficult subjects because it is the hardest units to get to anyway. So we all have the least possible experience playing against them or with them. So next question: what do you think of the rule of lurkers at the moment in all matchups? Anyone want to take this? I guess I'm the Cirque player here. I mean, lurkers are extremely powerful units, but it's not particularly easy to get to them. So I really like where they're at for the most part. Protoss has a counter in disruptors against them, so that's one of the changes that I really liked a couple of patches ago, where the disruptor got their ethereal form so that it actually helps dealing with lurkers. Cirque got the Ravager upgrade to 13 range to actually deal with lurkers. A little bit better. Terran still has siege tanks and whatnot, so I like where the lurker's at. Maybe it needs to get a little bit nerfed. It is a really powerful unit, but it's, again, not particularly easy to get to. So there is a risk associated to that, and yeah, I like where it's at. Anyone else?
I'm just gonna say, like in Terra versus Zerg, it's extremely hard to judge the power of the lurker because almost nobody's using it. Like you have Zerg already has the Baneling that I've been using for so long, so people don't really see a reason why they should try out the lurker to deal with Diabolds, for example. So I mean, I can't really say if it's too strong or too weak against Terran yet. It just doesn't seem to really fit in anywhere. But then again, like if you're playing maps like Terraform, where there are a lot of choke points, perhaps it turns out that Zerg players are going to figure out a way to play, the lurker style instead of Banelings, and, consuming the map and taking control of positions with lurkers. Like, I think we're just going to have to wait and see for better Zerg players to really dig into that unit to see the strength and its role in that matchup.
Yeah, oddly enough, or rather, like lurkers in CVT, like, again, they're not easy to get to, and that's one of the main problems, right? There's no easy transition, and I was at first kind of concerned that lurkers would overlap with banelings because they're both AoE damage and whatnot, but I think they serve pretty different roles now. I liked getting lurkers a lot more against mech than I do against bio because I had more room to get him. And then it was more like a positional thing and where you put him and that little bit of surprise damage, and then repositioning and burrowing against slower units rather than bio, who can just usually run away from them. So I like the lurkers in CVT against mech, and if you're going them against bio, like you said, I think you have to play a positional game, maybe start choking your opponent with them, and most likely you would be playing a Roach Hydra style into lurkers. But then you have to decide between lurkers or a much easier to get to Ravager, for example, which is going to be pretty powerful against bios as well. So there's pros and cons. I'm not sure if the lurker has the best spot in the game, but I like where it's at, if that makes any sense at all.
Okay, so in PvC, I think Puck can take the Disruptor versus lurker thing, because I think he has more experience with that. But for me, the only problem I have with lurkers is, for example, a Hydra lurker composition, the observer doesn't have that much of range, so sometimes, when the Hydras stay concave and stuff, and that's quite typical in PvC engagements, you could lose the observer and then you have nothing against the lurkers, and you make adept warbands and he kites, and things happen. And with the Oracle being such, I would say it has such an expensive detection ability. I know you can do it from a long range and stuff, but lurkers can be spread out. That can be annoying and frustrating situations. And you talked about, wanting to avoid a frustrating situation. So let's say I had slightly easier way to detect lurkers. I think they're in a balanced / maybe slightly underpowered position versus Protoss, because I think by far Ravagers, they just perform better. Like, not by far, but by a little bit. I just think they perform better than lurkers, honestly. I don't really mind, they do little damage to adepts, and if they have, if you go Void Rays or Phoenixes, which is my units of choice to counter lurkers, I think, or in general, I think Ravagers, they can handle that better, and killing cannons, pylons from long range, etc.
Actually, Ravagers are also the best answer that I found to carrier so far. Just to
Yeah,
go
so,
back to that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my point.
Yeah. That is a very fair point indeed. Good question. Okay, we're taking 3 more questions and then calling it a show. Did you guys find anything good in chat that you want to bring up? Nope.
Okay.
Okay. Frankish in chat asked, I've seen a lot of people talking about the pace of the game. What do you guys think? I think I like the pace of the game better than in Heart of the Storm, but I cannot stress enough that I think that the Team Liquid economy would be the best way to go about it. I played the Team Liquid economy change in Heart of the Storm, and it's felt by far to me like the best possible solution for the pace of the game. It just felt like, the game was quick enough that you had multiple options to be aggressive early on without being super punished by it, but also without having the option to do game ending damage. It felt like you felt naturally pressured to expand and contest expansions. You were always playing with small numbers of units, but always wanted to be aggressive and always wanted to start trading and denying those expansions and fighting over them. You wanted to spread yourself thin, but not so thin that you could lose workers to like run-bys, for example, because that's so much more painful without potentially macro mechanics being there, for example, which is what I suggested. So I like the pace of the game, and I think the game feels faster and much better than Heart of the Storm and Wings of Liberty. But I think that there's room for improvement, and I don't think we've explored it, and I sadly don't think we are going to explore it.
Personally much better for Protoss, just like playing overall, because in like Heart of the Swarm, it'd be basically sitting at home waiting for Warp Gate to finish before even being able to do anything out on the map. But now it's like we have ways to actually chase a Reaper and deny it, and then also do counter pressure and just have a map presence overall. So you're not just like looking at your base the whole time.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, well, at least from what I saw in Protoss and Heart of the Swarm, a lot of the time it came down to Protoss just defending, until they had a lot of warp gates and a pretty like good army with a good like chunk, whether it was like High Templar, Colossus, things like that. And if they moved out before that, the other races would be able to counterattack and do a lot of damage, and it made it really difficult with them being able to move out without going completely all in. But now in Heart of the Swarm, or I mean Legacy of the Void, I see a lot of Protoss players like doing constant aggression and things like that, which didn't really happen in Heart of the Storm because they were punished so easily.
Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and say that the thing I like the most about the faster economy is that you get workers faster. To me, the best thing you can do is just have workers come into play faster. Of course, you would also like it to keep it to the extent where harass also has an effect, but still, like I would even go as far and say that you should start with an optimal saturation, either 16 with the current, mineral patch setup, or even better, you reduce the mineral patches by 2. Basically, you just make them gold bases, and the optimal saturation would be 12, right? Because what happens then is, first you can remove the differentiating mineral patch mineral count, and it would be basically the same as double harvesting mod with the Team Liquid mods, if you think that is too complicated. Because what will happen is, basically all the good things of the double harvesting mod, bases becomes more valuable because you get more minerals out of your mineral harvesting with less workers. You can have 4 bases. You can basically scout with the first worker you get off your 12 worker count, because it's going to be inefficient anyway, so you can get efficiency out of it with an early and cheap worker scout. Like all the pluses of the double harvesting mod, and I discussed this a lot with sort of, and I think I've talked about it with MorroW as well. But I agree with CatZ that the double harvesting mod would have, which is again why I would like them to still be open to drastic changes, but I think the economy changes at this point would just be a dream. Is better, double harvesting mod and stuff like that. So I think most importantly is, I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way, but when around the time you go for a third base in a macro-oriented game, there's like 1 minute and you have 4 mineral patches in your main and you're forced to take the 4th, like mandatorily. It can feel like there's like a moment there of which like attack timings and stuff can be extremely powerful and stuff. So yeah, and like the problems with taking a fourth base and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it. But the faster you get into the game, economically, the better it is for the game, in my opinion. So yeah.
I think the 12 workers start, like, still, I think that's like close to the absolute best change they've made to the game so far. It just feels so amazing to just like jump into a new game, and like 2 minutes into the game, you're like already fucking done with your build order and all that, and the action picks up. I think that's so fucking amazing. Like, it's great, much greater as an spectator sport. It's the biggest deal. But then also as a player myself, like, it's just feels so fucking fun, man. Just queuing up a new game and just getting into it immediately. The overall pace of the game, I think, has improved a lot. It's just like you get into like late game quicker. So far I feel like there's less moments where you just sit around and you just wait for stuff. You know, like in Horror Swarm, like you would just sit around and just wait for something to finish, like your upgrades or like your timing for SCV pull or whatever. In Legacy of Void, it always feels like you can be active on the map and go do stuff. There's always like something to contest. With the new bases, like you always have to expand, and that just means like, so right now we're fighting over whether or not he can grab a third base, and as soon as he secures it, like, okay, now we're fighting over if we get a fourth base or not. There's never this like, okay, he sits on 3 bases and now it's just nothing is happening for a few minutes. So there's always this just natural tension between the players about needing to expand more, and I think that's really great.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. The game is way more fun than Heart of the Swarm or Wings of Liberty. I just think personally that there is still, or was still, potential for improvement. That's all.
Yeah, me too. Like, of course, like if I could be in charge of Blizzard for one day, like I would turn the game upside down. But if we just stay realistic here, like Double Harvest, it's not gonna happen.
It's not
I think like Legacy of the Void, the economy model, I think it's good enough, and it's a big improvement. So I'm just overall pretty happy about it.
Yeah, let's call it a 95%, and we were aiming for 100, but 95 is gonna be
pretty much.
Yeah.
2 more questions, and then we'll be done. Let's see. There's a good one here, actually. Do you think Legacy of the Void will finally remove the Death Roll versus Death Roll fights and create more small skirmish-based fights? Well, we basically just answered that for the most part. MorroW did, and yeah, I mean there are anti-death bowl units. A lot of them. The Viper, for example, with a parasitic bomb. Disruptors are anti-death bowl units. Liberators, to some extent, I suppose, are anti-death bowl units. So yeah, I think that death bowls did lose a lot of power, but there are still exceptions because of how powerful those units are in the late game. But I think that can be fixed with tweaking if it becomes a problem, like for example, the carrier unit compositions and whatnot. But like MorroW pointed out, because we run out of minerals faster, and because the speed of the game is faster, we're fighting usually over contesting 4th bases and 5th bases and stuff like that. And if you can cut that down, then that's a way to stop those death bowls from ever coming into place. So there's multiple mechanisms in place to prevent swarm hosts and Heart of the Swarm, basically, or Broodlord Infestor, or just Turtle Mech, or mass air toss kind of thing. Like that, there's definitely a lot more safety nets now. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Does anyone have a different opinion?
I just want to add that like revolving around Death Bowl, I think it has always revolved around the way all the Protoss units work, how every gateway unit is just fodder, and then you have the Colossus, and then you have the High Templar, and everything else is absolute garbage. And the way that they've done it here is that they've just buffed gateway units, and then stuff like Colossus is weaker. So naturally, like the Protoss is the individual units by themselves, these throwaway units, if they're stronger, you can suddenly spread them out more naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, that alone is helping so much with preventing death bowling and so on. But then you also get like positional units Liberator or Lurker, and they're actually like when they're in that position, they like lock down the position, and what that allows a mobile army to do is circumvent it and run to other places. So actually, by having turtle units like Siege Tank, which we often see in death ball scenarios, like it doesn't necessarily mean that it's encouraging death balling. Like units that are slow and super powerful and like our Siege units, they, if anything, I think it rather encourages not using death balling as long as you have places on the map to contest over.
Yeah.
I will say
So,
this:
those units are like, I think those units are helping a lot with that.
yeah, my favorite matchup I think to play out of anything so far in Legacy of the Void was the previous patch when mech was still the way to go for Terran, basically before the macro mechanics got reverted. CVT was just so much fun, and the reason I'm going to this is, you know, it was both players somewhat building to deathball units, but then the engagements were kind of even and kind of traded evenly, and and I felt and you could feel your opponent having not a lot of resources to remax, and you not having enough resources to remax, and then it goes back to those small skirmishes and stuff like that, and that's what anti-deathball units do as well. So I really think that for the most part the deathball thing is somewhat controlled. The only problem that I had in this current patch is that Protoss could get and secure 3 base economy and double forge if they wanted it because they had 1 pylon. But hopefully that won't be the case anymore with the nerf to the overcharge. Maybe it will
And
still
Evo
be,
chambers,
but
right?
I mean that could still, yeah, and Evo chambers for the drop. But you know, that can always be fixed with more tweaking, and I think we're going the right way. But in the current build or as far as I've played, it can still be very frustrating to versus a Protoss that's trying to turtle at least on 3 or 4 base because of how the pylon overcharge works. But I don't think it's a design flaw, and I think the game is going in a good direction in that sense.
I agree with everything. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about death balls because I just wanted to be sure that it's the same thing necessarily. Because to me, there's 2 factors contributing to the negative death ball. That's the turtling and the immobility that you can't move, right? So I've plenty of games, you know, getting Carriers, Tempests, Colossus Disruptor versus Protoss. And it looks death ball versus death ball-ish when you fight. But what truly happens is that these engagements are not bad because they usually happen in mid-map situations or with open area and stuff like that. So my point is, I think it's possible to have death ball-ish compositions which function greatly because as long as there's something to fight for, that there's like, I'm not saying necessarily timers, but you have the expansions to fight for, that you have to take your own expansions, or your opponent has, you know, he has his death ball that he can decide to split up however he wishes because of this more spread out stuff. I think that the only true negative death ball we can have is the, you know, Protoss, like especially associated with force fields. I think the force field was the most negative thing for Protoss death ball that we have, and I would call any Blinkstalker Sentry ball a death ball in Heart of the Swarm, basically. With force fields removed, I think it's interesting to get these army clashes, so it's not all about going in the direction of splitting, 10 summons there, 5 circlings there, all that. Not only that, but I like to keep it as a constantly viable option and still have these opportunities to see army engagements, which could be called, you know, death balls, but of course we would aim to see them in a concaved versus concaved situation if both players micro well, and with you know, reinforcements and all the necessary micro. I think that's cool to have in the game, and I think it's something that, you know, for RTS real-time strategy is a fundamental thing to have it. So it's not just about multitasking, but for the most part, if I would have to prioritize, definitely small skirmishes and harass and stuff like that, because I'm sure in a real war, however we like that kind of logic,
Okay,
that's what they do as well, right?
that's how
Or that kind of reasoning. So yeah, it doesn't have to be very a priori here. It's just, you know, experimentally speaking, it's from the game. It's definitely not bad, some of the death ball fights that we have, especially not compared to Heart of the Swarm. So yeah, that's kind of wanted to add.
Okay, fantastic. So
Thank
yeah, we're doing what? We're doing what in 10 minutes? Oh, we have like 10 minutes left on the clock, and so we're gonna take one final question, unless anyone wants to add anything to this Death Bowl discussion. Okay, so on to the last question. It says, I guess I'll. There's two questions by the same person. I think I'll take the first one. Do you guys agree the first one's better? So, no. No. Wait, there's a better one that by the same guy, I think. Yeah, 1 second. Let me look it up on Twitter. Okay, I think I like this question. Do you guys want to answer this question?
The
Whatever.
design philosophies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's go with that, and then we can take. Okay, I'll take the search side of things. So, what, in your opinion, are the core design philosophies behind each race? Are they meeting that right now in Legacy of the Void? So, I think that this is an important question for people that are new to the game and kind of want to know what race to pick, for example, like what suits them better as players. I strongly believe that, you know, each individual has a set of skills and talents and whatnot, and there's going to be a race that just suits you better. So I will go ahead and talk about Zerg. Zerg traditionally is a race that's extremely reactive because of how hatcheries and larvae work, and how the buildings work. You make one building, and then you get access to unlimited numbers of a certain unit, right? Through larvae. So you can wait for your spire to finish and make 20 muta at the same time, and that's why Zerg, I believe, its biggest strength is in reacting, in seeing what your opponent has and trying to counter it as best as you possibly can. So I think that that's the main core philosophy as far as Zerg is concerned. Other than that, something that gets mentioned often is how it's a swarmy type unit or type of race that you kind of throw units. You rely on having greater numbers, on surrounding your opponent, that sort of thing. That still remains true. Zerg is a very positional unit, but maybe less so in Legacy of the Void because of how the units, how there's units like the Ravager, for example, which, you know, are more expensive units rather than units that you can make lots of because they're super cheap and small. So I think that the same philosophies apply to Legacy of the Void, and I think it's really hard to even detach your race from that because it's just how the macro mechanics lay out things for you and how the game is designed at its core. So I don't think adding or removing units does much to affect that, but maybe to a little extent, Zerg feels a little bit less Zergy, but I don't think that's a big issue, to be honest. MorroW?
About this question, what I think they have walked away a little bit from their design philosophies about each individual race, and I think that's a great thing as well. So I just feel like in general in Legacy of the Void, like you are not restricted to play in a certain way that your race is, you know, supposed to play. So Protoss, for example, has been like 5 years, just a coin flip race, most of the time just all in. And that's what makes you successful, because you're a good mind gamer. And I think they're walking away from that a lot in Legacy of the Void. The same with like Protoss has a huge fucking laser army that destroys everything. They're walking away from that. The same with like Zerg being an extremely reactive race, and, you know, being a race that's swarmy, you know, fights in open areas and all that. They're walking away from that a little bit, you know, with the Lurker, Ravager, and stuff like that. And then, you know, Terran is just a race that, you know, fucking, you know, drops everywhere and just wreaks havoc upon your enemy. And then, you know, now we get, you know, the huge power tools like Liberator, for example. So Terran get this, you know, sturdy like fucking army that can actually put up a great fight. The same with the Hellbat in Harder Storm, just getting that in there. So I think they're just putting the races a little bit closer together, but I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think the opposite. I think that's a great change because I hate the idea of being restricted to play in a specific way that your race is supposed to be played. I think you should be able to play any way you like with any race.
Yeah, and there's still like weaknesses and strengths to each race that are going to be unique to how the macro mechanics work, or even how the buildings and tech scales up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I too think that we're walking away a little bit from that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing at all. I like it.
I'm not even going to say that it's not necessarily bad. I think it's absolutely phenomenally good that we go away from 2-base Protoss and over to something that actually feels a lot like Terranish, with constant adept harass and stuff. Like I would even describe Protoss as, like, if balance adjustments go through and stuff, I would say it's become a lot of a hit and run race, whereas Terran versus Protoss a lot before was more, that kind of thing. Of course, I still think that's possible. You can make your Medivacs instead of Liberators, get those guys later, do your harass and stuff, and Protoss could probably do the same. And again, Protoss can also, utilize the defensive warp in, and, not turtle, but play more defensively, because I hate to use the word turtle. So I think it's very difficult and very open to talk about race philosophy here, but it's definitely true, like MorroW said, that they're going more closely together. But I think the most differentiating thing, if we have to talk about it, is Zerg concept Terran and Protoss. I think Terran and Protoss, besides the balance issues, has a lot of the same tools now. Reinforcement rally through the ground, the core unit seems to an extent the same, except for the powered warp prism and stuff. But Zerg, like you said, CatZ, has this reactive play through the lava mechanic and infinite production. I think it works very well. And I think it's good, and I think that's the race you want to play if you like to swarm and make quick decisions with a lot of, overwhelming commitment to a path. And I think that's the way I would like to define that is that Zerg has more freedom, because they can kind of go from each route a bit as it pleases, whereas Protoss and Terran, they, of course, just like Zerg, they're more committed they have different upgrade routes as well, but you need 3 Stargates, and you have your factories, and probably Terran is going to base his entire position around, going either mech or bio, and how his infrastructure and is evolving, and the same thing with Protoss, I think. So it's very difficult for me to point out differences between Protoss and Terran in terms of design philosophy. But I think the main thing is that Terran seems to be way more positional now, and Protoss seems to be way more hit and run-ish. I wouldn't say Terran is turtle-ish, but I think it's very positional, very engagement-oriented, and Protoss is, to an extent, feels a bit like Zerg versus Terran now. So they're definitely moving away from previous design philosophy.
Protoss is definitely a lot more harassment-oriented, but defensively, I think it's a lot more. You still have to play very preemptively. You can't just like charge in, because there will be little mines and things like that. So it's still pre-positioning and using small batches of units to bait out. So yeah, it's kind of hit and runish.
Yeah, I think when people ask me on my stream before, like, like what race should I play? I'm starting to play StarCraft. I always said kind of like, if you like making decisions on the spot, if you like adapting, if you feel like you're good at decision making, I would go with Zerg. If you're better at planning, if you're better at kind of, if you want to be the one dictating the pace of the game rather than adapting to the person doing that, then you play Terran, and mechanics are probably the most important for Terran or wearing Heart of the Storm. And then if you're just a douchebag, you play Protoss. That's no longer the case. So I think that Protoss definitely, Protoss design was always an issue, and it was always a problem. I'm glad that Blizzard has put a lot of effort and time.
You should get any pro Protoss player on this show and talk about Protoss design philosophy, and they would yell at me right now for saying that it's a good thing that Protoss gets away from 2-base and force fields and pylons. I think there's going to be certain WCS champions who would like to say that they like their Protoss all-ins and stuff like that. But I don't like it. I'm sorry.
I don't necessarily think Protoss all-ins will entirely go away unless they
definitely
make
not.
changes to Adept soon, which they probably will.
Yeah. And I think right now the only all-ins that really are strong are the Warp Prism Adept ones. So I think
Yeah.
once those get changed, which they probably will, yeah, I think it's going to be cool. It's going to be macro play from Protoss almost like exclusively.
All right, perfect. And with that, unless anyone has anything else to add, we'll just move on to shoutouts and call it a show. Nothing to add it is. So, Andrew Pirelli, Intense, any shoutouts?
Yeah, shout out to my team at Psystorm Gaming on Twitter. And if you guys like my, I guess, time here on the show, follow me on Twitter at IntenseSC. And thanks for having me on the show, CatZ. It's
No
cool.
problem, man.
Been a cool
Thanks for
experience.
being available and coming on at short notice.
Yeah, no problem.
Book.
Shout out to Flipside and all the viewers that make this happen, and along with CatZ for inviting me on last minute.
Great. Thank you again. Same as Intense for being available and willing to come on. MorroW?
Yeah, nice show. Thanks for the invite. I think this show was much better than the last one, much shorter and all that. I still think we went in depth a lot of it, so we didn't miss out on the content. You can find me on Twitch TV/MorroW. I'm a regular streamer. In fact, I think I will be streaming about an hour, so you can come check me out if you want.
Awesome. You'll be streaming in an hour?
Yeah, probably in about an hour, maybe a little bit more than that.
Okay, cool. Theo?
Well, thank you, CatZ, for getting me on the show once again, and also getting more on the show. It was much better this time, much more, compact.
Compact, yeah.
Very nice red line of threading. And if you would like to follow a Protoss who is the closest thing to the opposite of a douchebag in CatZ's world, considering not doing a single pattern rush or a single Warp Prism all-in with Adepts or anything of that sort, and you would like to watch a stream that is different from losing a Warp Prism with 4 Sentries inside and going for a double Colossus and still win, you can find me on Twitch TV/Theo Mikkelsen, and my Twitter the same, Theo Mikkelsen, as also should be displayed below my name. Thank you, and thanks to Invasion Esports for being supportive.
Theo has always been a different kind of douchebag. I mean, you, like in Heart of the Storm, you were a very unique douchebag, right? Like all you did was turtle on 3 base, go into carriers into Tempest, Storm, and just work your way there, right? So like, yeah.
Well, actually, I mined out on my 3 bases before I took a 4th, but yeah.
Good times, man. Anyway, from me and Rob from production, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Thank you very much to our sponsors, which you have seen rotating on the side of the screen the entire time. It is thanks to them that we are able to maintain our team Root Gaming. So follow @Root Gaming or @Root4Root on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter @RootCatZ, and send some love to our sponsors whenever you can or whenever you get the chance, so that we can continue to do things like this. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
I like how nobody calls.